بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Welcome to the fourth episode of the fourth season, $1 trillion Problem of the Fourth Podcast. I'm Ali Wazir.
I'm Ibrahim Ali. And I'm Talha Muhammad.
And you can help us grow by giving us a follow on Instagram at thefourth.productions and Twitter at thefourth_prod, PROD. Thank you all for joining us again for another episode of the fourth podcast. Actually have a special guest with us, Sister Haleh Banani. Sister Haleh, welcome to the show.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. So, Sister Haleh, we're here invited you on our fourth season of our podcast. And in this season, we decided to speak primarily about campus life and student debt to our listeners. The title of the season is $1 Trillion Problem, which is taken from a book title that spoke excessively about like the problem of student debt and the student debt crisis in this country. So, would you be able to give us and our listeners a quick idea of what you do and how you could give us an insight into this?
Absolutely. I did my master's in clinical psychology, and I've had over 20 years experience treating the Muslims, alhamdulillah, worldwide. And I have worked internationally as well, being an international speaker, and have founded several programs. There's a marriage program, premarital programs, and an empowerment program for sisters globally, and just focus on improving the mental health of the Muslims.
Yeah, that's great to hear. In your experience, like all this work that you've done, what are the primary issues regarding mental health that college students face?
Okay, I would say that there are like top 6 issues of mental health with college students. Number 1 being anxiety. There's a lot of anxiety that college students feel as far as the pressure to perform, meeting expectations. There's cultural expectations, there's parental expectations. So this built up anxiety that can lead to an anxiety disorder or panic attacks. There's also depression, where that also has to do a lot with the idea of not meeting sometimes your own expectations, feeling that you cannot perform, feeling pressured, whether it's peer pressure or whether it's dealing with all the ups and downs of college life. And many times what I have found is that many of the college students, and I work primarily with Muslims, they end up doing self-medicating, using drugs and alcohol in dealing with the anxiety and depression, since many of the parents are not in tune, or they see mental health or seeing a psychologist as a stigma, and so they end up self-medicating. So that's very problematic. So that the top 2, I would say, is anxiety, depression. Then you have, at this age, it's very natural to have some levels of crisis. So whether it's an identity crisis, you're wondering who you are, what are you meant to do, what are you supposed to study? There's identity crisis. There could be a spiritual crisis. So you have been raised in a household with certain guidelines, certain rules, certain principles, and now you're being exposed to the world and you are reevaluating everything. So many people face spiritual crisis at this time. And for some, they face sexual identity crisis, where they are evaluating where they stand sexually. And I would say that's the third. And then fourth, with a lot of the sisters on campus, they have body image issues, which could lead to eating disorders. I've had many clients that come in and they have what's called body dysmorphia. They view themselves in one way. They see themselves as being obese, when in reality they're a size 0, and they end up being anorexic or bulimic, and this body image really destroys their self-esteem. They're obsessed with it. I've had college students who will refuse to go to class just because they don't feel good about themselves. It affects every aspect of their lives. And you have individuals that will have suicidal thoughts, and they end up either doing any form of like self-harm, or they actually attempt suicide. And it all is based on self-loathing. When a person hates themselves, so whether it's based on some of the depression, maybe it's the fact that they don't know who they are, where they're going, maybe what they want doesn't match up with what their parents expect of them, and they feel lost and confused, and so they feel that the only way out is through suicide. And even with the Muslims, even if they don't attempt it, or they don't have suicidal thoughts, just wishing for death. I find a lot of my clients end up praying for death or wishing they were dead, and that also is considered suicidal ideation. And then the final one I would say is the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, which many times we trivialize it. However, it can be misdiagnosed for anxiety disorder, because I've had many clients that were college students who went and saw their practitioner and they said, I have anxiety. And then what I found out, it was really that they had ADHD. They were not performing well in school because they couldn't concentrate. They were missing assignments. They were overwhelmed. And that led to the anxiety. And so, a lot of times we belittle ADHD, but in reality, it's an executive function disorder, which leads people to, it prevents them from taking necessary actions.
So, Sister Haleh, you mentioned a lot of the current issues that are ongoing within our society, especially within amongst college kids. I guess the next question would be, after assessing all of the issues that you see, what are some things that college students can do personally to help improve their mental health on campus?
Okay. So one of the things I really promote is self-care. And it's very difficult for many college students to do the things I'm asking for you to do, because it is what is compromised a lot of times. Sleeping regularly, right? And many times you pull all-nighters, and it's really hard to have a synchronized schedule or sleep regularly. The eating healthy, exercising. They've done a lot of studies, and they have found that exercising is as effective as antidepressants. So many times I have my clients actually exercise. If they're feeling depressed, if they're feeling anxious, I have them exercise, and that leads them to having a more productive life. They are less stressed. They are a lot healthier. So one is just being in tune with yourself and making sure that you are taking care of yourself in order to perform at a maximum level. And it makes sense, right? Because if we are taking care of our car, we're making sure that you change the oil, you put in the gas, you're taking it for regular maintenance, it's going to perform much better. So we definitely have to prioritize self-care. Another thing is learning stress management, having maybe a support group. If things get overwhelming, you can do counseling. I know that many universities offer counseling. And what I want to say about that is that if you have a hard time, let's say, organizing your time, if you are stressed and you need that counseling, I highly recommend you getting that. However, if it has to do with something like identity crisis, spiritual crisis, sexual identity crisis, these things that involve the religious perspective, then I would highly recommend going to a Muslim therapist who understands your background and understands your religious upbringing. Another thing you can do is surround yourself with positive peer group. One of the most important things that you need is congruence between your beliefs and your actions. Actually, the way to determine whether someone is psychologically healthy is to see if they have congruence between their beliefs and their actions. And when that matches up, then you are definitely able to perform well and you are more at peace. Now, what happens, and our peer group has a profound impact on us, right? Because if you're surrounded with individuals who have similar belief group and they support you and you're encouraged to do the things that you value, then you're going to obviously feel better about yourself and you're going to have that congruence. What I find with a lot of college students is that they will come to me and they are completely broken. They are crying. They feel so ashamed and guilty because they were raised in an Islamic household with certain belief systems, got involved with groups of people who had the opposite belief system, and they started adopting their ways of life. They started dating, they started drinking, they started partying. And because of this lack of congruence, they actually fell into depression and anxiety. And so we have to make sure that we maintain this level of congruence. And the way you can ensure that is by surrounding yourself with people who will reinforce your beliefs, not go completely against it, and not make you do something that you don't believe in, because that leads to cognitive dissonance. And that leads to also a lot of mental health disorders. And finally, you need to have the spiritual connection. My life changed when I went to the MSA in University of Houston many, many years ago. And just having that spiritual grounding can definitely impact you. And when you have the tawakkul, the trust in Allah, when you live according to certain rules and principles, that will guide you and it will help you to navigate your life in such a difficult period.
So that's all very interesting, Sister Haleh. I want to ask you a specific question because under the issues that college-age students face in regards to mental health, you mentioned depression, under which you said a lot of them begin to self-medicate and use drugs. And also under solutions, you mentioned that it's important to surround yourself with a positive peer group. In season 2, we asked Sheikh Mikael Smith about drug abuse as well. And the context was different in that season, but we did ask him, for a lot of us, like college aged or even high school aged, for like some of the younger listeners of this podcast, we have friends who are involved with drugs and self-medication in this way. But how do we balance like trying to be a good influence on them while also not getting sucked into that ourselves?
That's a very good question, because there's always that feeling of responsibility. There is that amr b'maruf, nahi anil munkar, that you want to encourage good and forbid evil. And then just having that natural empathy for your friends where you feel that, oh my gosh, I don't want them to go in the wrong path. I want to help them. But something that is very important in this aspect is that you have to, first of all, assess the situation. And it's very much the analogy I like to use in helping others is like a lifeguard. If a lifeguard is trained and if they have stamina and they are strong and they are good swimmers, then they're able to go and save the person who is drowning, correct? However, if the person doesn't know how to swim, and if they are, if they don't have stamina and they don't have any kind of training, that in the process of trying to save the other person, that they may drown with them. So you really have to assess, where are you at spiritually, right? How diligent are you, or how strong are you in your conviction? And I wouldn't test it as far as putting yourself in circumstances where you feel like, you know what, I'm strong enough. And so many hundreds, if not thousands of my clients have fallen, individuals who are very well-meaning, they were very strong, spiritually, and they were very knowledgeable, right? And they thought that they were helping out a friend. And it could be a brother trying to help a sister learn more about Islam, or let's say someone helping and other individuals in the case of like what you're saying, an individual who is addicted to drugs or alcohol, and they're trying to help them. And in the process, if they are not strong enough, then they get involved with it as well. So you need to basically be very honest with yourself and assess yourself and see how much you can handle, and sometimes even emotionally how much you can handle. I know that a lot of college students, they end up seeking counseling from their friends, and that can be pretty overwhelming. I had one client who told me her friend was suicidal, and so she would reach out to her middle of the night, and that can be very overwhelming. So assessing how much you can handle, you can be kind of like the paramedics, the first on the line, and assessing what their situation is. So it's really critical to be there for your friends, but on your terms and in your territory. So instead of joining them and going with them and trying to pull them out of whatever they're involved with, include them, keep in touch with them. Maybe the best form of dawah ever is your own character, your own example. That is much more impactful than giving them lectures or telling them, how haram what they're doing is. They probably already know that. It's just about enticing them back into the right path. So you could invite them to, let's say, your halaqas, or go out with them and do it on your terms rather than meeting them on their terms, because then you're going to expose yourself to many things that you're not even maybe sure if you are strong enough to withstand.
So, Sister Hala, in one of our previous episodes, we talked about, the effect of student loans and how student loans impact the mental health and the mental well-being and the mental wellness of college-aged individuals, be they like fresh graduates or how it affects them later on in life. So, from your experience, how do student loans and like debt from school, how do these things manifest themselves in the mental health of students?
Right. So student loan debt was correlated with lower levels of psychological well-being. There's a level of anxiety of how am I going to pay this back? Or there could be a increased level of depression, feeling the pressure and the inability to pay this back. And sometimes you have what's called a financial denial, where they are so overwhelmed by the student loans that they actually choose to ignore their money problems. And what ends up happening is that they get further and further into debt. There is a book called Mind Over Money by Brad Klontz, Klontz, that addresses this, and it may be a good resource for many of the students dealing with this. So it does lead to a lot of anxiety, shame, guilt, and so it is very critical to address it and make sure that someone doesn't fall into that financial denial, because that will just increase their level of debt.
What about the impact of cultural expectations on people? Like, I think you mentioned it briefly, but could, I know a lot of our listeners for sure, the college-aged ones are of like immigrant diaspora like us, and cultural expectations play a big role, which we talked about excessively in episode 2. How do you think that how have you seen that impact students and their mental health?
It has a huge impact on the students, because there is the expectation. For one, is the pressure to pursue certain degrees. Of course, there is that desire of wanting their kids to become doctors or engineers. And if the child is not, it doesn't excel in that area or doesn't enjoy that, and they are forced to go in this field, obviously this leads to a lot of resentment. And if they're not able to achieve it, it actually leads to feeling of low self-esteem and some depression. And there have been cases, unfortunately, of suicide when many students are not able to achieve the expectations or the goals that parents have for them. So the pressure to pursue certain degrees, that's one of them. Then there is also this many Muslims lead this double life because their parents have a certain psychological, or like not psychological, sorry, they have a certain spiritual expectation for them. They expect them to be religious, they expect them to do certain rituals. And because they're not maybe very understanding or flexible about any kind of changes, so if the student feels, or if the child feels that they have certain expectations that they are not meeting spiritually, they end up leading a double life. I actually did I did a conference for the youth here in Dallas, and most of the ones who are attending, they told me that most Muslim students lead a double life. They are one way with their parents and at the mosque, and then they lead a totally different life with their peers. And this is because of this unrealistic expectation and this inability and inflexibility. So everything has to be a certain way. And if anything deters from that, then the parents are very unaccepting of it, or they may be very punitive. And so many of the children, what they end up doing, or the young adults, I should say, is that they just pretend to be one way with their parents and at the mosque, and then they're completely different, which unfortunately this breeds hypocrisy. And I think that is one of the ailments of our ummah at large, where many people will portray themselves one way, but they actually lead this double life. So that's another area of contention. And it's also having to do with marriage, because this is, you're now at a marriage age, and many people end up meeting their spouse in college. That happened with us. We met at the MSA, and we're from different countries. And there was, we faced a lot of challenges with that, because both our parents wanted us to marry within the same culture. And so that can be a point of contention, where someone will either be forced to marry someone, it's an arranged marriage, or they are prohibited from marrying the person that they love. And this leads to a lifelong problems. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to marry the right person and not to be forced. And what happens actually when you're unable to marry the person that you love. I mean, there's so many consequences to that. So these are the main issues. So it's the pursuing different degrees, being pressured to pursue different degrees. It could be as far as leading a certain spiritual lifestyle, or being very strict, and that leads to hypocrisy. Or it could be that pressure to either, marry someone that you don't like, or not being able to marry the one you do love.
So, Sister Haleh, you mentioned cultural expectations in great detail. I was just curious, like us being the next generation, obviously going into future future marriages, future parenting. How do you see us as this current generation, and our ability to affect the future in terms of cultural expectations, our child's psychology and sociology, and how they approach the world? Do you have any advice for the future generations and our listeners as well, of how we can perhaps alter these cultural expectations and these social expectations into more realistic ideas and ideologies by which our children can then, actually apply and listen to?
Absolutely. And that's such a great question to ask. First and foremost, you have to really get to understand yourself. You have to overcome a lot of whether it's the shortcomings, whether it's insecurities. The more you understand yourself and you're at peace with yourself, the better you're going to be able to have relationships, the better you're going to be able to raise your kids. So one of let's say the program I have is a premarital program called Laugh and Learn, which I did with the comedian Baba Ali. I thought, what would get people who are in love and who want to get married, sit down and listen to a program? Because usually people have that mindset of, we're in love, and that's all we need. All we need is love, right? And it actually is. You need to learn the marriage skills. You need to prepare yourself. And I just find so many people falling into the same trap because they just didn't educate themselves. Many people, they don't have good role models at home. They are from a very dysfunctional family. They haven't seen what a good, healthy relationship is like. So part of it is learning the marriage skills, right? And then knowing how to resolve your problems, because one of the best things that you can do for your children is to have a healthy marriage with your spouse. And this is, I think the older generation really overlooked this. They didn't see the importance of it. Many times I have clients who come in and they will say, fix my, whether it's my teenager or my college student, he's on drugs, has depression, has anxiety, just fix them. And I start asking them about their relationship. And they're obviously fighting. They obviously are dysfunctional. And when I tell them that, you need to first work on yourself, you need to overcome, whether it's your anger issue, if there's anger, if there's fighting, if there's all of this, how do you think that is going to impact your children? And, many times they don't want to address that. They're just like, just fix my son, just fix my daughter. So knowing yourself, improving who you are, overcoming your obstacles, then learning about the marriage skills and having a good, healthy relationship where conflict resolution, where how to effectively communicate, where how to connect and build a friendship, that has a profound impact on your children. And then being able to be open-minded enough, because I think this generation, since many of us have been raised here, we have a very different perspective. We are able to see that connection, that we're united. And it's not necessarily how, if you are from the same country or the same village, but it's about having that compatibility and being sensitive to that and understanding and having more acceptance for your children. I think that is the most critical thing. I have parents who come in and they have their children in all sorts of scenarios where they feel like they have been misguided. And their immediate reaction is to yell, scream, and punish. And that methodology is not serving us. Many people are cutting ties with their family. Many people are leaving Islam, unfortunately. So it is so critical to just be more understanding, be more flexible, try to definitely have a relationship with your child, because rules without relationship leads to rebellion. So if you are constantly saying, what is halal? What is haram? It's usually more focuses on the haram, right? Everything is haram. And then the child, feels suffocated. I had one client, she was probably 16 and she had like a number on her wall counting down basically when she's going to attain freedom from her parents because they were so restrictive. So it's about being open-minded. It's about having that relationship and then working on yourself to be the best example. And part of my motivation for doing this global support group for sisters, it's called the Mindful Hearts. And it's all about overcoming. It's about empowerment. So if a woman is, let's say, empowered, if she feels confident, if she feels happy with herself and she has emotional intelligence and she knows how to bring out the best in herself and the best in others, well, obviously she's going to be a better wife. She's going to be a better mother. She's going to be able to contribute at such a higher level in society.
And Sister Haleh, I think you mentioned a beautiful point of establishing that relationship with your child. And I definitely know personally that local imams, usually a parent comes to them with a child that's 18, 20, 22 years of age, and they're like, as you mentioned, fix my child. And the number one question that usually gets asked, that imams usually have told me is, where were you? Where was the parent for the last 18, 20, 22 years? Because that relationship is so crucial to the social dynamic of the child.
It sure is. It sure is. And, many times they will complain and they will tell me, my daughter doesn't listen to me. She doesn't want to spend time with me. And that I do go back to when they were, let's say, 2 years old, 5 years old, when they were saying, mommy, 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 play with me, talk to me. And they want to share and they want to listen, they want to have this, they are really in need of that connection. And the parents a lot of times neglect them and they don't have time for them. And they will actually say, get away from me or leave me alone. I've had many of my clients tell me that that is a common phrase that they hear from their parents: leave me alone. I don't have time for you. And so this definitely will affect them. And when they see that they don't have someone to go to, when their parents are not willing to have a conversation, they're not willing to help them, and they're not willing to have fun with them, then they're going to resort to other means to fulfill themselves.
So I want to backtrack just a little bit. I remember you mentioned hypocrisy and how students live a double life, one with their parents and one in front of their peer group. And I just wanted to ask, like, what is the long-term effect of this? Like, societally, how is this going to impact our future generation? Because, I mean, obviously, it's not healthy to have have this sort of behavior. So, what do you think are some things that we can do to overcome this? And also, what is the long-term impact of this sort of behavior?
Well, the long-term impact, we're already seeing it. We're seeing people. I mean, I have people within, my clients that are very knowledgeable. They could be Hafiz of Quran. They could lead prayers. They have the knowledge. They have the practice, and yet they end up doing things that are very contrary to their beliefs. And this is because they had led this life of, okay, it's all about appearances. It's all about checking off that list. It's about my length of my beard and my clothing and where and it all is like a list of rituals. And if we are not if it's not affecting our hearts, and if it's not, these rituals have to affect our hearts and affect our character. And if we're not making that link where, a lot of times these young adults are forced to do rituals, and it's not out of conviction, it's not out of understanding, it's more out of, if I don't do it, I'm gonna be punished. And there's always that threat of, you're going to go to the hellfire. So there's a very like that. There's a lot of fear induced into the children, where if you look at it from a psychological perspective, people perform so much better when there's positivity and encouragement versus fear. They actually did like a Harvard study, and they had a group of 6 adults doing a very simple task that any toddler could do, putting the circular object in the circular hole, right? Anyone could do this, but it was a time restraint. And then as they were doing this, they had one individual stand there and start saying negative things to them, and saying things like, you're stupid, you can't do this, this is too hard, and just repeating this over and over again. How many of those 6 do you think were able to complete the task? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm not sure. You guys got guesses?
Maybe half.
Half? Okay, actually,
I get 2 out of 6, 1/3.
okay, actually, none of them. None of them were able to complete a simple task of putting a circular object in a circular hole. Okay. Then they redid this test with the same group of adults, and they had someone standing there saying positive words, saying, you know what, you've got this. This is easy. This is great. You've got it, and every one of them was able to finish the task. So this tells us that if we use positivity, if we use encouragement, if we use understanding and love, then we're going to be able to influence our kids so much better. And so talking about this, the hypocrisy and what it leads to, it's actually very devastating. You have, Muslim couples who are cheating on each other. You have Muslims who, they appear one way, but then they do so many things that are contradictory to the belief. So, and they find it's almost like it's acceptable because they've been doing it for so long. And I think the way to change this is to not be so rigid and inflexible where there's only one way to do this, and if you don't, then you're either like cut off or you're going to be punished. It's about having that open dialogue and really listening into your children, understanding what they are facing, what they are going through, and making adjustments. I can use the example of, for instance, the hijab. There are some people who will force their kids to wear hijab, and it's like, I don't care whether you're ready or not, whether you like it or not, you are going to wear it. And you find that in that process, what happens is that the individual who was forced to wear it, either they sneak around, they take it off and they wear all sorts of other things, or they end up slowly hating not only their parents and not only the hijab, but they end up hating Islam and they leave Islam. I can't tell you the number of clients who have shared how frustrated they are with their parents because there's inflexibility. So I think this idea of being more accepting and hearing your kids out and understanding where they're coming from, and giving some room for flexibility, and giving some room for, okay, I understand maybe you're not ready to do this right now, let me help you, without it being so rigid. I think that is truly the answer, and for them to feel like they can be themselves around you. I personally don't want my kids to in any way want to lead a different, double life. And so I try to be very understanding with where they're at in order to accomplish that. But if we put blinders on and we just expect them to be a certain way where they're not ready to be that way, then we're definitely breeding the hypocrisy.
SubhanAllah, I think a lot of the issues that you mentioned are actually very relevant to what we see on campus today, and the solutions that you mentioned, inshallah, are going to be very helpful. As like a final question, I wanted to ask, my parents actually also attended the University of Houston back in the day. That's their...
Yes, they're friends of ours, mashallah.
Correct. That's actually correct. But I was wondering, maybe so that I can tell my mom, but how has the college experience changed since you attended college, to what you see in college students now? Like, I think there's been a demographic shift where perhaps back then a majority of students were like first generation immigrants, whereas nowadays the majority of our peer groups are like, at least in the Muslim community on campus, are at least like second or third generation. And I imagine the issues we're facing are very different. Like what is different and what is still the same?
Okay, so what I see is that obviously with the onset of the internet, it has exponentially facilitated many things. So I can start from there. I remember, signing up for classes. We had to wait in line. We're in this heat of Houston, and it would take hours and hours. Research has definitely changed. We had to stay in, let's say, in the library and research. We couldn't even copy the information. So it has definitely, and the online education, it facilitated so many things. But I feel that it has also created a lot of fitness, right? So it's so much more accessible to see inappropriate material, and whether it's the online dating, whether it's like the pornography. I have so many young adults who are addicted to pornography where that was not accessible before, and not as accessible. And you have this just ongoing distraction, which I feel is actually much more difficult at this stage. You have this hunger for validation being on social media, and this and as connected as people are globally, they are socially disconnected. I was videotaping. I had my daughter who was 15, and she had her friends at at a restaurant, and I had to take a video of this because every single one was on their phone, and it was just unreal how they're just so disconnected when they're sitting right next to each other. So I find that there are definitely different challenges, and I think that it is much harder. I remember also my mom, as I was, raising my kids, she just kept saying, Alhamdulillah, I finished raising you all. It's so much harder now. So it does, I think it is exponentially more challenging. You have much more accessible to you. The fitan is more, I feel that we were restricted in the sense that things were not as accessible, and the majority of people were safe from certain things, and now it is accessible to each and every person. So there is that the self-discipline has to be quite strong. This idea of ihsan and living with that consciousness that Allah is watching at all times, because there is so much accessibility. As far as college life, I think that for the most part, I think the college life experience is very similar, but these aspects, I think, makes it much more challenging for your generation.
So, Sister Haleh, mashallah, tabarakallah, you dropped a lot of gems by which we can learn from and utilize them in our daily lives. But I just want to ask if you currently have anything going on that you would perhaps like to let our viewers know, any upcoming events or anything you're doing currently that we can perhaps actually benefit from, or our listeners can benefit from as well.
Sure. I think the premarital program will be excellent, the Laugh and Learn. And you can get that on my website, halehbanani.com, and you go under courses. I actually have some free material as well. If there's the Ramadan relationship repair. Ramadan is around the corner. And I, really emphasize to people to improve all your relationships. And that's usually not a focus during Ramadan. People just want to read Quran and get those checklists, right? But it really, every ritual that we do should affect our heart and our relationships. So you could look that up. That's a free video series that I have, Ramadan Relationship Repair. There's the premarital program, the Laugh and Learn. I think anyone. I told my kids when they want to get married, they actually have to do the 5 Pillars of Marriage program. That is the more comprehensive marriage program that it gives you the blueprint of having a successful marriage. It's something, my husband and I, mashallah tabarakallah, will be married happily married, inshallah, 25 years this summer. And we put this program together. It took 3 years to put together. And I told my kids, you need to go through this. Your fiance needs to go through this, and y'all need to pass the test in order to get married, because I really feel like it gives you the tools. So many people, when they've been married 15, 20 years, they go through the program, they're blown away by it, alhamdulillah, and they tell me, I wish I had this at the beginning of my marriage. I wish I had these tools. I wouldn't have made so many bad mistakes. So there's the 5 Pillars of Marriage program. And then what I have specifically for the sisters is a global support group. It's all about empowerment. It's really phenomenal. It's called the Mindful Hearts, and it's all about learning the psychology of your mind, how to be the best version of yourself, how to be emotionally intelligent, how to overcome the stress. And you can join it at any time, because there are live lessons and then there are recorded. So as the person comes in, there's the recorded videos, and people who have been going through this, they will report that it's totally transformed their lives. Mashallah, tabarakallah. They're better wives, they're better mothers, they're more empowered, they feel great about themselves, the body image. So those are the things that I would highly recommend, inshallah.
Inshallah. Of course, many congratulations to you and your husband on the Silver Jubilee.
Sure.
Jazakallah khair. I know, I can't believe it's silver anniversary.
And I think a lot of our friends and peers will be very happy to hear about the programs you're offering. There's always excitement about this topic for sure.
So Sister Haleh, we want to thank you so much for joining us, and we want to thank all our listeners for tuning in to the Fourth Podcast. Be sure to give us a follow on Instagram at thefourth.productions and Twitter at thefourth_prod, PROD.
You're so welcome. It was a pleasure to be here.
As of now, we hope you all have a great rest of your day. Fix my child.